Skype doesn't ring anymore on my computer.
Maybe you should get a new computer.
Yeah, your Mac Pro is probably broken.
I'm going to blame Skype.
I think it's a Mac Pro. We should do some quick follow-up with regard to, what's the official name for it? Voice memos or voice messages, whatever it is that Marco and I were running into.
Raise to listen.
Yeah, well, the thing that we solved by Raise to Listen, maybe. I will answer that I have not seen one of those misfires with the, speak a text message to somebody. I've not seen one of those since you and I had the simultaneous epiphany and invention of turning off Raise to Listen, Raise to Wake, whatever it is. How's that been for you?
Yeah, same thing. Raise to Wake I still use. Raise to Listen is what we turned off in the messages preferences. And yeah, I too have had no accidental doo-doo, as I'm putting my phone in my pocket, and then I end up sending or half sending or trying to send a very long audio message of my pocket, basically. So yeah, I've been very happy with that so far.
I wonder if they picked the wrong defaults on this one then, because I understand the feature. I think I even remember it being demoed, and I understand the utility of it, especially if you frequently need to fire off a text message, but you don't have time to type it, so you just want to bring it to your face, talk, and put it down, right? But the unexpected consequences of enabling that feature were obscure enough that it took you guys a while to figure it out, and it makes the phone seem like it's broken.
You want to bring Daisy in? She seems to have an opinion.
Yeah, seriously.
She's got an opinion about people walking past our house.
What's been going on with her? I haven't heard an update on RecDiffs in a while.
It's springtime, so the windows are open on the house, and there's more people walking by on the sidewalk all the time, and there's more interesting smells out there, and there are birds and squirrels, and so she's going a little crazy.
And we wanted to point out that Layers is the tickets for Layers are available. This is a 3-day conference that's during WWDC. A lot of people seem to have come to the opinion that Layers is strictly a designer conference. And although design is a heavy part of Layers, it is not at all a designer-only conference. I went, 2016, I believe. And the only reason I'm not going this year is because it's more appropriate for work anyway if I go to WWDC. But Layers is phenomenal. The speakers are always great and diverse. The talks are always phenomenal. They are oftentimes about stuff that I would never think I would find interesting, and then am absolutely fascinated and riveted by them. And so you should definitely, if you're going to be in the area of San Jose, if you like delicious snacks, and or if you like both in the food sense or in the brain sense, if you want a snack for your brain, go to Layers. It's good stuff. Because Marco, you've been to at least one in the past, right?
Yeah, I've been to 2 actually. It's funny. The one you went to was the one I didn't go to, but I went to the one, I think 1 year before that and the year after that, and they were great. It's run by our friend Jesse Char, who does lots of wonderful things, and Elaine Powell. They're the partnership that they put on this great conference every year, and it's great not only if you're a designer, but if you are, a single person product person where you need to concern yourself with such things, or if you just like cool stuff. And so, not only do they have great talks, they really are great on the diversity front, both of people and of ideas, which is really nice. And usually they get really, really talented speakers as well. And also, it is just such an incredibly fun conference because Jesse and Elaine, the organizers, are so... Not only are they very fun people themselves, but they know what's fun. And they know what people who go to conferences need and what you don't even realize you need, but you really do need. And so you go there and the snacks are amazing. The coffee is amazing. They throw the best parties and this wonderful after party. It's so much fun. And they build in fun and socializing into the schedule as well. So you're not just sitting in a chair all day. It's just a great conference. It's really fun. And if you're going to be in San Jose, I highly suggest you check out Layers.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And if Marco says the coffee is amazing, you know that it's going to blow your freaking mind.
It actually is amazing coffee. I wouldn't say that lightly, but it actually is amazing coffee.
Indeed. And, the way that I knew that they really were not fucking around was that the only time I went, I should say, is that what they had a I don't want to call it a snack table because it wasn't for snacks at the time. It was almost like a refreshments table, but they had mints and aspirin for those of us who stayed out too late drinking.
They had Tylenol for hangovers. Yeah. It was great.
And they also had these little, I don't know how to describe them, but one-time use, no water required toothbrushes in case you needed to freshen up a little bit. Maybe you just rolled in from the bar directly to Layers. So Layers is a truly great conference, and I don't recall how much tickets are off the top of my head, but I remember it being very, very, very affordable, especially compared to WWDC. So if you are at all interested, and you will be in San Jose, or could be in San Jose, I think it's the first 3 days of WWDC.
Yeah, I believe it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday usually. And yeah, it's great. And yeah, the tickets it's between an iPad mini and an iPad Pro, somewhere in that range.
So anyway, the URL is layers.is. And again, I cannot recommend it enough. Don't let anyone scare you. I mean, I could see how at a glance you could look at their website and say, "Oh, this is for designers," but that's not at all what this website is trying to say. And I think that the initial, maybe it was the first year, it was very design heavy, but even if it's about design, in my experience, it's about the sort of design that everyone cares about. It's not about, specifically UI design for a specific mobile app or anything like that, or usually anyway. It's just about all sorts of interesting and cool stuff. And it seems like, not unlike Singleton from years past, the marching orders for speakers are basically, hey, talk about something cool. That's about it.
It's also,
talk about something cool.
I have to point out too, if you happen to be at WWDC in San Jose last year, if you happen to notice as you're walking out of the convention center that next door was this outdoor patio full of people who looked like they were having a lot more fun than you, that was Layers. And that happened. That was they would have these amazing snacks brought in, and everyone's hanging out outside and having fun, and then the developers are sulking out with their box lunches. That's it was the more fun looking party next door.
It's so true. I swear on everything I consider holy. I swear that one time I was walking to the conference and I passed this outdoor area, just like you described, and I'm like, wow, people are having a lot of fun out there, just like you described. What the hell is going on? Oh, it's Layers. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, everybody who walked past that kind of wish they were there instead. So you can be there by going to Layers.
Yeah, indeed. Anyway, so we'll let this go. But layers.is, Jesse and Elaine are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people, and they find wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people to speak at their conference. So it's really, really great. So today, there was a very interesting piece in, I believe it's pronounced Hodinkee, or is it Hodinkee?
Hodinkee.
I'm genuinely asking. Hodinkee? Okay.
I can't believe this is my worlds are colliding.
Yeah, indeed. So Hodinkee is, and jump in when you're ready, Marco, is a kind of online periodical website that's about watches. I presume mostly high-end watches, or is that unfair?
Pretty much exclusively high-end watches.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so Hodinkee is the Daring Fireball or TechCrunch of the watch world. And the person who wrote this, Ben Clymer, is either the founder or the head person now.
So anyway, there was an article. I guess they do a literal magazine, which is in print? ? Is that true?
This is volume 2. They literally just started doing this. But I guess this is also on the web. I don't know. I don't get the print magazine. I just read their site in a feed reader.
Suffice to say, they ended up doing an interview with Jony Ive, which is obviously relevant to all three of us, even if the rest of the website is not. And so there was an interview with Jony Ive, mostly, of course, about wristwatches and kind of how did the Apple Watch come to be, what does Jony consider important. And I have several pull quotes that I'm happy to go through in a minute, but perhaps we should give some overall impressions of the article. I didn't think it was particularly well written, but it did not strike me as egregiously poorly written. I think I'm the only one that feels that way, because several people I've spoken to, not just you guys, said it was very poorly written. I thought it was fine. I do feel like this is a world I'm not used to, because, and I didn't call out examples of this, but there were very clear descriptions about very many expensive tangible things that were not limited to wristwatches. And I can't think of a specific example, but clothes were described with excruciating detail.
It was it's like Sound and Vision magazine, where the magazine is funded by mentioning the latest movie on DVD or whatever, right? So when they're reviewing a DVD player, they have to say, I was watching, Captain America, and I could see the blue of Captain's, shield and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a product placement, essentially, and that's how they pay for this stuff. Only I think that's not what this was. It's just that this person couldn't help but saying, and the people came in, and they were dressed in this, and they were wearing these expensive boots by these brands, and you could tell they weren't just regular PR people. They were Apple PR people. It's like, oh, someone killed me.
Here you go. Yep. I was greeted by a team unlike any other in Silicon Valley. They're veterans of places like GQ and Harper's Bazaar, and they've studied at the Sorbonne and served in the White House. They're not dressed ostentatiously, but those understated boots must be Saint Laurent, or however you pronounce it, or maybe Bottega Veneta. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong too. It's a subtle reminder that Apple isn't just a tech company. It's potentially the greatest luxury brand in the world. Like, that just seems so gross to me. And maybe it's just that I'm not used to it. Maybe it's a Casey problem, but it just made me feel gross.
No, you know what? It's not a Casey problem. Like, I read this site. I like watches. I like Apple. I found this article insufferable. Like, it was just totally insufferable. And again, I read their site all the time, but this was way... I mean, in every possible horrible sense of the word, it was just like masturbatory. It was just like it was like a high school English student
right.
finally discovered the thesaurus feature, and oh god, it was so bad.
And see, it wasn't the mechanics of the writing. It was the choice. It was the choice to say, what I'm going to write here is I'm going to write like several hundred words about every aspect of my personal... It's sort of like gonzo journalism, but with less gonzo. Like, every aspect of leading up to this interview with my thoughts and feelings about how it was going and what I think about everything that I see. And it's just like, look, people, you have an interview with Jony Ive. All people want to see is the interview with Jony Ive. The 600 words of your personal experience leading up to that, and all your opinions about everyone you see and all the things they own, and all how you feel about things you own, and how you feel about things you might have owned, and how it's just like, oh my god, no one is reading for that, and that's a choice. And I don't think, like, it wasn't badly written at the micro level. The choice to take this very high profile interview with a person who doesn't give I don't know how high profile they are compared to like their watch people they interview, but Jony Ive doesn't give a lot of interviews, period, right? He's not all over the news all the time. He doesn't talk much in public. Get to the interview. So I totally disagree with that choice. And then when you get to the interview, the little italic sort of thoughts put in between the questions and the answers.
Oh, it's painful.
No, it was just killing me. Oh
god, yeah. It was this whole thing. I think this makes nobody look good. I mean, I think a lot of it was padded and fluffed up because this is a luxury site that is trying to expand into this long form magazine format, and so obviously it was puffed up for that. I think also it was fairly clear that he didn't have a lot of time with Jony. It seemed like, I'm guessing based on the amount of questions and answers actually in this versus the amount of fluff in this, I'm guessing he had like 10 minutes with him. It seemed like it was a really short interview.
I mean, it could have been 30 minutes. Like Jony gives good substantive answers in his way to questions that could have been answered in an even more short manner. So I bet it was at least a half an hour interview plus a half an hour photo shoot afterwards. Like, this is surprising amount of interaction for a watch site. I wouldn't have guessed unless Jony Ive is a fan of the site and like Marco reads it as well or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the whole thing, no one looks good from this. I don't know who they're trying to relate to. Half the people, at least, who read this are going to be people who have never heard of Hodinkee who are reading the Apple News, right? So to be bragging about how you really wish the Apple Watch was available in solid platinum with a solid platinum bracelet, and that which by the way, that would probably cost like $75,000, or to, it's a shame that you missed out on your bid for Steve Jobs' old Seiko watch that he wore once in a photo shoot, and the winning bidder was $42,000. You were the second, you were the second place bidder. Like, that is just so incredibly alienating, and it doesn't make anybody look good. It's just showing off, it's just throwing out money numbers that, like, I feel like in the luxury world, a lot of luxury products like, fancy cars, fancy jewelry, a lot of these things are very expensive. It's just incredibly tasteless to just be talking about numbers out there like that, to just kind of be bragging about how much you spent on things or how much you can or want to spend on such things. Like that's just, it's not a good look. And even for a watch site that is read by people, like, the watches they cover on the site in the news probably have an average price of about $10,000. So it's, they don't cover cheap things, but even for their audience, not to mention the audience that this piece was likely to receive because it's about a high-profile Apple person, it's just incredibly off-putting and alienating to be bragging so much about incredibly needlessly expensive purchases or wishes, and that didn't add anything to the article at all.
Yeah,
and I think Jony Ive didn't come out looking that great on this either. I don't think he gained anything from this. I think he had his typical kind of like Johnny in space kind of philosophy statements where it sounds kind of interesting until you try to parse what he said and realize he didn't say much of anything. And then I thought the way he referred to and talked about other watch brands was really condescending, and it was a little subtle, but if you look at the way he worded things, it was incredibly condescending and arrogant. And I don't think that came off as a good look either.
I didn't personally get that impression about what Johnny said, but the rest of what you said I agree with. This almost feels like, and I don't know anything about Benjamin Clymer, but this feels like one of the rich kids of Instagram grew up and actually sort of made a living for himself, but you can't change the fact that he's one of those rich assholes from Instagram. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. It's just, I don't know. It just feels gross. Now, that being said, and even though I completely agree with what you were saying about how tacky it is to talk about, oh, well, I lost that bid and it was one for $42,000, thus implying he was willing to spend $30,000+ on a watch. Do you feel like that's maybe just the Americans in us? You know how like it's very taboo in America to talk about how much you make, where I've heard in other countries that's far less the case. Do you think that's what this is, or do you think it's just freaking gross, or both?
I mean, there's probably a little bit of that in it, but I don't think that's all this is. I mean, I think this was just, really overindulgent, alienating writing.
Yeah, I don't think it was the money. I think it was the format, the choice to like if someone who's reading this article is not interested in what the person who's writing the article, every detail of their lead up to the interview, they just want to get to the interview. And speaking of the interview, this is the impression I came in with. I've read probably every interview with Jony Ive. I've read the recent Jony Ive book by Leander Caney, I think, which I thought was a pretty good book about Jony Ive and gives lots of insight into his character that I didn't have before. And my impression of him in this interview was he was his normal, thoughtful, slightly Jony Ive in space kind of person that we always expect him to be, and that he actually really admires and is into non-Apple watches, but that he also really likes the Apple Watch. Surprise. I didn't get anything that was making me think that he was looking down on other watches. If anything, he revealed himself to be a bit of a watch fanboy, regular watch fanboy, and I thought he kind of that was the impression I'm getting of him, because I didn't know how into watches is Jony Ive, and in this interview I'm like, oh, he's actually more into watches than I would have thought he was, and I didn't think he was crapping on other watches, or he's certainly not a braggart, and I don't think he's particularly aggressively arrogant. So Casey pulled out a bunch of pull quotes here, and I can see how you might read one of these uncharitably and come away with the impression that he's crapping on other watches. But this is on the Apple Watch versus mechanical watches. He said, sometimes you'll wear an Apple Watch for outright utility, and other times you'll wear something else for nostalgia and affection. And it's like, oh, so if you want utility, you have to wear an Apple Watch, but the only reason you'd wear some other watch is nostalgia and affection? I don't read it that way. I read it as he really likes mechanical watches, and it's nostalgia for him because now he wears the Apple Watch all the time, because utility-wise, it does a ton more stuff, even if you could make the argument that telling time-wise, it has less utility than a mechanical watch. But affection, that he really does have an affection for mechanical watches, and that he understood what he was competing against because he himself is one of those rich people who buys really expensive watches and cares about them. And his friends all design them and he's super into them or whatever. I think that he was describing a reasonable, way to deal with the dichotomy between your computer watch and your non-computer watch. So I don't know. I didn't. Like I said when we talked about this earlier in Slack, I came away from this article really disliking the writer of the article and the choices he made, and basically having the same opinion, Jony, as I've always had. I don't think he came off badly in this article at all.
I think my main point about like the condescension and of him towards the other watch brands. So that quote you said, maybe you'd wear another watch for nostalgia or affection. Like that's a big thing, right? And you covered that. Also, there was one where he says, "I have so much respect for many of the other brands, Rolex, Omega, because there is remarkable longevity combined with such an obvious and clear understanding of their own unique identity. It's rare but inspiring when you see the humble self-assurance of a company that ignores short-term market pressures to pursue their own path." That, to me, so the combination of that, along with the, maybe a mechanical for nostalgia or affection, the combination of those things, to me, says, look at these quaint little companies making these quaint little watches. They're not doing the correct thing. We're doing the correct thing that the market is saying that they want. They're humble and they're pushing their own path because it's kind of based on an assumption that to not have the Apple Watch is inherently worse, and that the reasons that you would either choose to not wear one or that you as a watchmaker would choose not to make a smartwatch are not out of merit. They're not out of whatever you are making as a non-smartwatch or wearing as a non-smartwatch is just worse, and you're just doing it for irrational reasons like tradition or nostalgia or affection, totally ignoring the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there are ways in which other watches are better than the Apple Watch.
So I think you've got a chip on your watch shoulder. I think that's absolutely the wrong read on that.
Here's a chip on my wrist, John. Get it right. Come on. Watch shoulder.
Here's what I think the right read on that is. He is making a favorable comparison, a backhanded favorable comparison between Apple and those watchmakers that he admires. What he's basically saying is...
By the way, he has the most boring taste in the world.
Like Apple, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, these other companies have a clear sense of identity and think long term and don't worry about they do the right thing, and they have an identity, and they're all about longevity and the long term, and not about what I need to do next quarter, and not about chasing fads. And he didn't mention Apple, but I think that 100% was saying these companies I admire because these companies, like us, have this philosophy to be sort of long term, secure in their own identities, humble. He's always saying his design group is humble, and they came at the product humble. Like basically everything he says, nice thing he says about these things, he's also saying about Apple. So I think he really does admire those companies for exactly the reasons he says, because that's the reason he admires his company, because he thinks he's doing all those same things.
Well, I guess you and I interpreted this article differently. I see.
We got to get Jony Ive on the show
saying.
So we can ask him. But
that's likely.
Hey, he went on this watch blog. Come on, we can get him.
Yeah. All right, you get on that.
I'll grab him in the hallway at WWDC. He hangs out at those sessions, I think.
Oh yeah totally. These are just some quotes I thought that were interesting. With regard to the Apple Watch, Jony said, "I don't think there was a problem specifically. It was more of a matter of optimization of opportunity." And that seems to implicitly confirm what we all kind of suspected, that Apple said, hey, we could put something on the wrist. That'd be neat. Well, what would you use it for? I don't know, but it'd be cool, right? And so it seems like Apple Watch was one of the less opinionated products that Apple's come out with in recent years, insofar as they didn't really know what it was for. And if you obviously look back to the release and the announcement, it's pretty clear. And we've talked about that, the three of us, and many others as well. But I feel the way I read that anyway was kind of a tacit confirmation that is exactly what happened.
I think to give more context to this, I think the question was what problem was the Apple Watch solving? Which is a good question, an expected question to come from a traditional watch site, right? Because they're like, look, what's wrong with watches? Why did you have to come here and make a different watch? What's wrong with watches how they've always been made? What's wrong with all the things that we love? And Jony, again, being a fan of those type of watches, is not going to say, well, here's what's wrong with the mechanical watches. They can't do this, they can't do that, blah, blah, blah. Here's the problem they were solving. You have a problem with your mechanical watch, and we're here to solve it. And he says, no, that wasn't it at all. It was, in his typical obtuse way, a matter of optimization of opportunity, which is we've learned at Apple that, and I think he did this analogy somewhere else in the article, that taking computers from being, he made the comparison with clocks, which I thought was very clever. Like clocks used to be one big clock tower in the middle of the square of the town, right? A giant thing that, no one person owned, but it was like, hey, everyone can look up in the town square and see what time it is. And then eventually you get clocks in your house, but they're expensive and maybe you only have one clock for your entire house. Then eventually you got clocks in multiple rooms. Then eventually the clock is small enough that it's on your wrist. And at each stage of downsizing, new opportunities. Like it's an optimization of taking the clock tower and putting it all on your wrist. It's enabled by technology, and there's opportunities. Like what does that enable? How does it change your life? How does it change society, right? And similarly with computers, going from mainframes to personal computers to phones down to all on your wrist. That I thought was a good analogy, and it made sense, and it tracked with me of like what he was trying to say about, we weren't trying to solve some sort of problem that we had, like, oh, how can I live my life when I only have one clock in my house? I'll never know what time it is. Why do I need a clock on my wrist? It's so stupid. But it's an opportunity. It's a technological opportunity. And I don't think they needed to say, well, what problem are you solving in my daily life by putting this clock on my wrist or this clock in my pocket to go, pocket watches or whatever? It's like, well, you don't quite realize until you have that thing how it might change your life. And similarly for the Apple Watch, how might it change your life to have a little computer on your wrist? I already have a little computer in my pocket. Why do I need my wrist? What can it do differently? And there are opportunities. And as Casey stated, maybe they thought that the world of opportunities was slightly bigger than it actually turned out to be, at least with current technology. But there were definitely opportunities, and people do like their Apple Watches. And it turns out, fitness and notifications ended up being the two big opportunities that are sticky. But I think that was a fairly good answer to a fairly good question, despite the terrible lead up to this interview.
Not that we're bitter. With regard to just designing new ideas, Jony said, things are exceptionally fragile as an idea, entirely abstract. But once there's an object between us, it's galvanizing. And to put a little more context in this, he was saying, once they build a prototype, and not necessarily like a functional prototype, just like an object. Like think about when you're designing a car and doing the like clay model or whatever it is. He was saying that, you can just kind of talk around and around about things prior to that model being in your hands. But the moment you see it and touch it, it's, that's when the conversation really starts. And that's not surprising, but I just thought it was interesting. With regard to material science, and this was the context here was talking about how there was the gold Apple Watch, now there's the ceramic Apple Watch, etc. Jony said, we have now worked with ceramic and with gold, and our material sciences team now understands these fundamental attributes and properties in a way they didn't before. This will help shape future products and our understanding of what forms make sense. I don't think that this is any particularly strong clue for any particular future product, but I just thought it was interesting. And again, it's obvious, isn't it, that, oh, now they know how to work with gold, and maybe they'll do that again in the future. Oh, now they know how to work with ceramic, and maybe they'll do that in the future. And certainly in the lead up to, I think, was it the iPhone 10 that we were going on and on about whether or not there would be ceramic, or some people were going on and on about whether or not it would be ceramic, at least in part. And so I just thought it was interesting, him directly addressing the fact that this could be in our future somewhere. You never know.
Gold Mac Pro confirmed.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
This I thought was perhaps the biggest stretch of any answer that he gave, because I understand what he was saying, that it's good for a design group to learn about new materials, but the utility of learning how to work with gold is very limited. Like, it's great. So you know how to make solid gold watches. Tell me how in any way that's going to apply to any other product in your lineup. I mean, maybe it'll apply to gold glasses frames in 2050. I don't know. But it's not particularly. Ceramic maybe has more applicability. I did also like the bit that he threw in, which I think was, a brief glimpse into the difficulty of being Jony Ive, that it was fun to do a product that you didn't have to make in large quantities, talking about the edition. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just like, God, everything we make, we have to make like 10 million of them. It's nice to be able to make this gold thing that we have to make like 20 of them because nobody buys them, right? Obviously, he wouldn't give sales numbers, but that was a nice glimpse into like, it's so much less stressful. Like, everything I do, I don't have to think, will this take an extra half a second during manufacturing, which multiplied out by the number we're going to make is an extra 6 months on the schedule or something.
Right. It's so true. I noticed that as well. And then my final poll quote, which I think might have been my favorite, I will call this "Jony discovers the internet." And he was saying to the writer, he was saying to the Hodinkee writer whose name I've already forgotten, Ben Clymer. Yeah. He said, with regard to Ben's review of one of the prior Apple Watches, this is now Jony talking. That was the other thing that struck me about the feedback to your review, the vitriol from some of the commenters. It's not surprising, but it is unnecessary. Well, yes, that's
unnecessary.
That is accurate.
Unnecessary. Thanks, Dad.
It's unnecessary to criticize Apple.
It's unnecessary to be a jerk about it. I mean, but here's the thing I was most surprised about is that he, A, read the review, and B, read the comments. All right, fine. You read the review. Maybe you read, because again, maybe he reads this website because it's apparently the website that people who like expensive watches read, right? But then you read the comments? Like, don't read the comments, Johnny.
Everyone knows that.
Apparently not him. I mean, he's just like, yeah. And the thing is, it's not surprising. So it's not like he's shocked that people are mean on the internet. But his advice, it's unnecessary. Oh, thanks. Now that they know it's unnecessary, I'm sure they'll stop.
We are sponsored this week by Mack Weldon. For 20% off your first order, visit mackweldon.com and enter code ATP at checkout. I can tell you a little secret. I've been wearing Mack Weldon underwear for every single show that we've recorded in the last year. Because I bought my first set of Mack Weldon stuff last year, about last April, and it is so good, I've just kept buying more. And this is the first time they're sponsoring. I did that on my own volition, totally unbiased. It just is that good. I'm currently wearing their socks, their t-shirt, and the underwear. And next to me is their hoodie and their waffle warm knit shirt. Over there in the coat closet is more of their stuff. My drawer upstairs has, I think, probably about 10 of their t-shirts and a few of their long sleeve shirts, also known as the Merlin shirts. They are just great quality clothing. These are mostly focused on men's essentials. So underwear, socks, t-shirts. They have sweatpants and workout gear now too. When I work out, everything I wear except for my shoes is made by Mack Weldon. I have the shorts, the sock, everything. And it's just all so good. And they know it's good. They're so confident that it's good. Order your first pair of underwear. If you don't like it, you can keep it. They don't want it back. They'll give you a full refund. You can still keep it. That's how confident they are that you're going to like it. So they have this wonderful line of silver thread things that are naturally antimicrobial. This includes at least shirts, socks, and underwear. I wear these in the summertime, and honestly, you don't stink when you wear them. It's shocking. Like this is what converted me, is how good they are in hot weather. And in the summertime, I'm telling you, you have to get their underwear and their shirts. And of course, if you don't need the silver or you don't want to wear awesome fabric for some reason, they have lots of other fabrics as well, and they're all really nice. Their long sleeve stuff, their short sleeve stuff, their underwear, their socks. I highly suggest you try Mack Weldon. I would not tell you. They can't pay me to say that. They can pay me to read their script. They cannot pay me to tell you that I'm wearing their stuff right now, that I love it, that I've been wearing it for the last year. I begged them to become a sponsor just so I could tell you how good this is. So see for yourself at mackweldon.com, and you can get 20% off your first order by using code ATP at checkout. That is mackweldon.com with code ATP for 20% off your first order. Trust me on this, you got to give this a try. Thank you so much to Mack Weldon for sponsoring our show and for keeping me comfortable and not stinking all summer.
Google I.O. is happening, or at least it's happening as we record this. I watched bits and pieces of the general keynote, and I only saw a tiny bit of what I would call the State of the Union, which I forget exactly what they called it, but it's basically the nerd keynote that follows the general purpose keynote. I don't know how you guys want to handle this. I guess I'll just go in the order of whatever I guess was John put together in the show notes.
Don't. You should have read ahead. Did any of us watch the whole thing?
I watched the 14-minute Verge recut of it, which I consider fair.
Casey, did you watch it?
I watched most of the general public keynote, but not all of it, and almost none of the other keynote.
So I watched as much of it as I could, which was maybe a quarter of it. But
you laughed at me watching the 14-minute cut, and you couldn't even watch the whole thing.
No, for time constraints. Not like I was bailing out. For time constraints, like
I also had time constraints. I had a lot of napping to do today. It was more important than that.
Oh my god!
Right. Anyway, yeah, because I had a podcast last night, so I couldn't watch last night, and tonight I did as much as I could in between making dinner and coming here. Anyway, so I put a bunch of comments in here from tweets and stuff when it was going on, but I think clearly, as far as everything that I've seen, and maybe Marco with the 14-minute supercut can tell me if I'm missing something, there is one aspect of this keynote that I think is worth discussing in isolation. And if we have more next week, after all of us have either seen more of Google I/O or decided that there was nothing else interesting, we can talk about it then. But I think we should concentrate this discussion on one particular demo, and we all know the demo we're talking about because I think it is the most interesting, and it is emblematic of Google itself and the whole rest of the thing, and the other things that they announced similarly tie into it. And I guess I'll let our chief summarizer-in-chief describe that demo, since I'm sure he's seen it.
That is one of the things I saw, and my initial reaction, and I will explain what it is momentarily, my initial reaction was my chin hitting the floor, and just like in Looney Tunes, my tongue like rolling out like a red carpet across the room.
It's a gross carpet.
Yeah, right. I have since had some different thoughts about it, but that my initial reaction was, oh my God, I just witnessed the future and it happened today. So what am I talking about? I forget exactly how they set up the context, but what they were trying to say was, hey, what if you really wanted to make a dinner reservation? You really wanted to make it for 4 people at a particular restaurant, and you knew you wanted it to be perhaps on a certain day, or you just knew that it needed to fit in your schedule, in your calendar. What if you didn't actually want to call that restaurant, though? Maybe they're very difficult to get a hold of. Maybe you just can't be bothered, whatever. So Google, I guess it's the Google Assistant, which is their kind of Siri, if you will, if I'm not mistaken. It will actually, or it is capable of placing a telephone call to that restaurant on your behalf, which in and of itself, okay, fine. That's not entirely surprising. I can just imagine, hello, Ritzy restaurant in New York City. Hello, this is Google, or something like that. But they played a recording of this conversation, and it could not have been further from what I expected. It sounded unnervingly like a human. And I'm not talking about Uncanny Valley unnervingly. I'm saying we started in, hello, fellow children. We started there, walked right through the Uncanny Valley and went into, holy crap, that's real. That almost sounds like a recording of a human being. And the most fascinating thing about it was, aside from the fact that it was conversational, the most fascinating thing about it was it actually said like, so the maitre d' or whomever on the other end of the line says, we don't have any availability on the 9th. Would the 10th work? And then Google said, yeah, that should be fine. It inserted these synthetic pauses and stumbles and ums and hms in a way that was mind-blowing. I could not believe what I was watching. And there are many implications of this. But if we could just for a moment focus on what we saw and not really unpack the meaning of it, is that a fair characterization? Like, Marco, what did you think when you saw the 14-minute demo or the recap?
I too am very impressed with the technology behind this. But I think this is such a typical like Silicon Valley and in particular Google thing to do, where you have amazing technical smarts and you're applying them in a way that probably has some unintended consequences, or at least you don't care about the consequences, whether you intend them or not, and is also kind of creepy and a little unsettling. It's so stereotypically Google. Great AI, great big data service, kind of creepy, and not really getting the human problems here. There's lots of weirdness about this. So one big thing is like, some people have pointed out, like, what they're basically doing is turning the workers at restaurants and stuff into unpaid API endpoints. So that's a little bit weird, and
that's amazing.
And the other thing is, when I get pizza, my pizza guy, he has like 2 iPads at the register that are both running like different apps for all these different like menu ordering services and pickup services and everything. Like, he has to run like his side of it. And like, you look in like any restaurant these days, like, they're busy. They have to be dealing with all these online ordering systems, all these apps and everything, in addition to people actually calling them on the phone and people coming into the place. The last thing they need is for robocalls that pretend not to be robocalls, which is a big problem, to be calling them and making these like kind of human-like but a little bit off requests via voice, and kind of taking up their time on the phone. Like, it's kind of weird on a number of levels. it does seem like Google is taking advantage of the people on the other end. And these are people who don't have time to deal with BS from Google. Like, you as the user of this couldn't be bothered to not pick up the phone, because you're probably already holding the phone, but to tap a different spot on the phone to make the phone call, to actually just be a human for 2 seconds and talk to them. Now, I get, we don't like making phone calls. I get that. I don't like making phone calls either, but I would feel way worse about initiating one of these, on the back end on my behalf than I would about actually placing that phone call. It's dehumanizing to the people on the other end. It's wasteful of their time. And I think it's a little bit insulting to try to hide the fact that you are a bot calling them. Like, I think that what they should do, if they're going to do this at all, and I'm not sure they should, but if they're going to do this at all, they should begin the call with, a quick way of basically saying what's going on. Basically saying, "Hi, this is the Google Assistant calling on behalf of John Syracusa. Do you have a reservation for this day?" Like, make it very clear, and stop with the fake ums and ums. Like, all that is doing is trying to trick people, and that is not in good faith. That is trying to take advantage of people and try to trick them into playing into your API without being willing participants of that. And that's just kind of sleazy. I don't like that. And if they did it the robotic way, like, or they actually just say what it is and they're upfront about it, that at least is, it's not trying to trick anybody. It is still wasteful of people's time, and I still would feel bad about initiating that call, but I at least wouldn't feel like I was like, I don't know, just like, deceiving people. It's just a weird thing. And there's another feature that I think one of you wants to bring up about calling about holiday hours, where apparently, like, on holidays where hours might be different, they will call the place like once in the morning to see what the hours are, and then they'll just cache those results so that allegedly it saves them from all these phone calls all day. What if they miss that call? What if they misinterpret the results from that call? When you think about the ramifications of before, if the person on the other end of the phone, said the wrong thing once in the morning to one person, it affected one potential customer. Now, if you slip up and say the wrong thing once in the morning, it could affect all your customers that day who would have come there from search. There are ramifications to these kinds of things that really just seem not really that good for the local businesses that are on the other side of this. And it's all of this is to create minor conveniences for lazy tech dudes who can't not just pick up the phone because their phone's already in their hand, but can't literally push one button on the phone to tap that phone number and call them instead. And I think this is a step too far, especially when it involves deception of the person on the other end and potentially wasting their time.
So I want to talk about the technology behind this, because I think that's Casey's first impression was based on the dazzling tech, and that's how I like to think about these things and think about how they could find themselves in a position where they're using this technology in this particular way. But first you have to talk about the tech. And the tech they're showing it's obviously, speech to text, because the person on the other end of the phone call says things and Google Assistant has to figure out what it is they're saying. So it's going to convert their speech into text. Then it has to have some understanding of what it is that they said. And then it also has to have some understanding of what its mission is. I'm going to try to get a reservation for this time for this many people, right? And the parameters of that mission, all the different things, like what if nothing's available? What if they have a particular call where they couldn't reserve a table for that many people? So it has to have that mission and has to understand what the person says. And then it has to be able to engage in a conversation, a back and forth of saying, you said this, now I say this, and keeping the state of it all in its mind, sort of semantic analysis of when you say that, when you make that sound thing on the other end of the phone, it means these words, and these words mean this actual, message or meaning, and that applies to what we've said in the past in this way. That's the tech that they're trying to show there. And researching and developing that tech, I think, is really important, a really important area of research, because if you can do that better than we currently can by some appreciable degree, many interesting opportunities come up. Like if I told you that even if it's for a very narrow domain, like making an appointment or something like that, whatever, pick the narrow domain you're choosing. If I told you I could get a computer to understand meaning behind things that you say and to engage you in a conversation to accomplish a goal. If you've been listening to me talk about cylinders on the show for a long time, it's been my push on the past several months worth of shows when we were talking about HomePod and everything, that I want to engage my cylinder in a conversation and work towards a goal, right? It's the same exact tech, only the difference here is I'm initiating the conversation. I know I'm talking to a cylinder because it's in my own house and it's sitting right there. There's no deception involved, and I would find that interaction better than having to initiate a series of commands or make a macro for myself or know a particular syntax or whatever. And even just within the realm of the things that cylinders are supposed to already do, to be able to have the extra smarts on display here, to understand nuances of speech and to understand like the overall mission of what I'm trying to accomplish and to help me refine it and narrow it and to be helpful. That technology is incredibly important and should be developed. And so I applaud Google for doing that. This, of all the places where this technology could be applied, I would not have even predicted that this would be where because they have a thing called Google Assistant that is just like this. There's a cylinder in my house with Google Assistant on it. They have phones. Like, isn't that the first most obvious application of that? Anyway, but setting that aside, the second aspect related to the application that they are showing here, which is, we're going to make a phone call for you behind the scenes, which, by the way, you don't get to hear this phone call. You just talk to the assistant and it says, okay, I'll make that reservation for you. And then you just wait and wait and wait. And in the background, it's having a phone call that you don't get to hear and don't participate in any way. Right. And then it comes back to you and says, yeah, I totally made that reservation for you. In that particular application of this technology, the pitch is that, you don't have to be involved with this. Don't worry about the details, but Google Assistant will handle it. And all of the things that Marco was talking about, of how deceptive it is and how disrespectful it is to the person on the other end, and how it isn't that hard to think of a much more respectful way to do this, like by pre-announcing yourself and so on and so forth. But that's not what they chose to do, that they're really leaning on the fact that they can, fake you out by pretending to be human, which, by the way, I think there still are in the uncanny valley. You can tell these things are not quite human. Just like they're still in the uncanny valley. It's not totally human. It's way better than it was before.
Like even in the canned demo they did it, like the way when it asked for noon and it said, we don't have anything, and like the way that the assistant like re-asked,
yeah,
do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. Like, no one talks like that. Like, this is your demo. This is your canned demo. Like, it's obviously like almost any response you get from a human being has a pretty high chance of not being of like being some kind of like slightly exceptional condition or things that require more explanation, that the Google Assistant will respond in some way that makes it clear, like, either this is a really weird person or this is not a person.
Yeah, it still seems very unlike a person. And that leads me to my next point about this tech. It's the same point I made about self-driving cars in the past. And it also, is related to the deception angle here. This thing, no matter how good it is, no matter how long it's in beta, it's going to fall over a lot. And when it does, because it's a really hard problem, like you will be trivially easy to be able to stump this thing and to have it start saying nonsensical computery things that are not related to what you say, that are to the point where the person would hang up on it, right? Because everyone sees this demo and it's like, it's HAL 9000, we're there. It's like, you are not there. Like, that last 10%, just like self-driving cars, the level 5 automation, right? That last little bit, that's a mountain that's way bigger than you think it is, right? And so even though it seems like we're right around the corner and it's like, Moore's Law, we'll be there in 2 seconds, it's way harder than you think. And so if you start off this conversation with the deception, like if that's your goal, it will be 100 times worse when the thing falls on its face. And it will fall on its face a lot. And from the business's perspective, obviously, ideally, they would all have actual APIs and not humans. But if they don't want to do that, from the business's perspective, they want your business. They want this reservation. If you pre-announced and said, this is the Google Assistant, I'm a computer acting on behalf of a person, blah, 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 after the first 4 or 5 calls of that type, the person on the other end would know how to most efficiently deal with this stupid computer thing to get the reservation, because they want the reservation, they want the money, right? It's the whole reason people set up like with all these apps and everything, right? And maybe it will motivate them to get on one of these apps to not have to deal with these stupid computer phone calls, but they'll, it's better than not getting a reservation at all, right? But if the thing's going to fall over, like phone trees, like when you call the support thing, we all know their phone trees, and we all know their various failure modes by this point, and we know how to navigate them efficiently. I would much rather have that than something that tries to fool me into thinking it's human, but then like goes berserk, and now I have to go, I wasted all this time talking to you like a human when I should have just been playing you like a video game to get to the point where we make the reservation. Like let me text adventure all over again. So I don't. Even if people see this and they think this is a great feature and it has important applicability in my life, because that's another point on this, that some of the comments I pulled out here, like there are places where this exact feature is actually really important for people who literally can't make that reservation themselves and do want to appear as human as possible, right? There's an accessibility angle to this. But even in those situations, even in the most optimistic scenario, my advice to anyone watching this is, do not expect this to work even as well as it did in that demos all the time, because it won't. Like it will work, and it doesn't always work with humans. Sometimes it's difficult for a human to make a reservation. Sometimes you can't hear anything in the restaurant. Sometimes people are ornery. Sometimes they hang up on you. Sometimes you lose your cell signal, right? But the success rate of this thing is going to be way lower than people think it does. We are a long way off from even with limited domain. We are a long way off from passing the Turing test. Now, it doesn't mean your reservation is not going to be a success, because once the other person on the other end figures out that it's a computer, they'll play the little game and they'll get the reservation because they want the sale, right? But don't get starry-eyed about how amazing. I mean, it is an amazing leap from anything that we may have seen before, but it is still so far from whatever the equivalent of level 5 self-driving automation is for having a conversation with a human. Even within a limited domain, because humans are inscrutable and it's really difficult you just can't account for everything that they're going to say and do. You can't account for all the nuances. It's like the reason they work at all is because when the computer acts like a pig-headed computer, the person eventually, best case, reverts to thinking this is just a pig-headed person who's not listening to what I say. And like they just have a one-track mind and they just want to make this reservation, and they didn't understand what I said back to them because they're not paying attention, or maybe they're driving or something, and then you just roll their eyes. Like that's the best case scenario. But yeah, if and when they actually launch this, I can't wait to see all of the conversations that people manage to get this thing into where it just goes completely off the rails, because it's a hard problem. And that's why we're also impressed by it. It's such a hard problem. It's like, I didn't even know we were this far along. Surely we're within striking distance. And I think that we are not within striking distance.
Oh, I mean, you can even just picture, like, what if the person on the other end has follow-up questions? Oh, okay, you want a reservation? Where? What part of the restaurant? Mm-hmm. It's simply like that. Or like, oh, do you want the table outside or inside? Or like if you're ordering a pizza. Oh, do you want a medium or a large?
The most misguided one was when he's, obviously this is forward-looking. This was Sundar Pichai was the person doing the thing, I think.
I don't know.
But anyway, the presenter said, we don't have a lot of time, so maybe like your kid is sick, and you need to make a doctor's appointment for them. Like, have you ever made a doctor's appointment for a sick kid? That conversation involves a lot of questions about what's wrong with your kid, and did you take their temperature, and how are they feeling, and when's the last time they threw up, and but like, no computer is hell. I get on that call and I feel like I have to have like information ready, like to be like, when's the last time they came in? When's this? But like, there is no way I would let a computer make that call. I barely think I myself am competent to make that call. Right? Maybe I would let them make the call to the school to tell them that they're not going to be in that day. But really, the schools just have a website where you can click something because that's stupid. But like. Yeah, that was the wrong example. Ordering food, making a reservation, something with a business transaction where the person on the other end is motivated to deal with my crap, computerized crap or otherwise, because I'm sure those people deal with people crap all the time too. People being rude when they make reservations and just generally being inscrutable, right? They're motivated at least to do that. But like, my doctor is not motivated to listen to my computer. My doctor, like whoever answers the desk, has a ton of questions about my kid, very specific questions, to determine whether you should even come in. Oh, we don't take pink eye in the office. You should do this and that. And what do you want to do? And what pharmacy is near? Like, no way a computer can handle that. So I think they're I hesitate to say the heart is in the right place. I actually think it is. I think the heart is in the right place in terms of doing this research and having the overall goal of trying to help people. But the way they're going about it baffles me because, like I said, they have a cylinder that they sell you that I would love to talk to in this way. They would not involve deception at all. And if my cylinder could talk to me like this within the limited domain of music or appointments or whatever, it would be an amazing advance of how I talked to my cylinder today. But they didn't demo that. They demoed it making phone calls for you, which just boggles my mind.
I think this is, to my eyes, a very good example of just because we can doesn't mean we should. Which is basically the summary of all of Silicon Valley, in my personal opinion. Like, it's so obvious. Like, after I saw the technology, which again, I cannot stress enough, I think the technology is amazing. And like you said, which is what I was going to bring up, there's an accessibility angle wherein I think this is more reasonable. Like, if I am mute, if I literally cannot talk on the phone.
Yeah, or if you have a speech impediment, or if you have, say, like maybe you have to call a place where you don't speak their language very well, or you have a thick accent that's sometimes misunderstood a lot. Like, there's lots of accessibility reasons for this kind of technology.
But sheer laziness is not it.
But the application would be different there. You'd be speaking through it. You would want to be in on the conversation. In other words, you wouldn't want it to go off and do it completely on its own. You would want to be, like, in most situations where someone has a synthetic voice speaking for them, they don't want to leave the room when it's happening. Like, if they can be there and see your face or hear you or hear the other end of the conversation or monitor it or otherwise nudge it in the right direction, like, they want to be some kind of participant and not just like, set it sail and just let the computer do what it's going to do. Like, and getting to cases like just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like, it's more subtle than that because they can and should develop this technology, but it's exactly how you choose to apply it. And the subtle difference between what they demoed and talking to your cylinder, which seemed like isn't that the same thing? It's a human talking to a computer having this conversation, but the difference is subtle, and it's telling that this is how they chose to show this off. Maybe because it's seemingly the most impressive, but it is the most ill-conceived. And I don't even think, like, I say it's ill-conceived just because of the world we live in now. It could be, as many have pointed out, that, like, once this genie's out of the bottle, we will deal with it the same way we deal with those stupid phone trees, which we could have had the same exact conversation about because they have a lot of the same problems. It's disrespectful to the caller. Sometimes you get tricked into thinking it's human, but eventually we just all get used to it. We get used to the disrespect. We all learn to very quickly pick up on the cues of whether this is a pre-recorded human's voice or not, right? Despite no matter how they try to fool us, and they do try to fool you on those stupid phone trees sometimes, we just all get used to it and we accept it. And I fully expect that if this turns out to be popular, this could totally happen with that technology as well. But I still maintain that if you have this technology and are advancing it, this is not the most bang for your buck. There are better ways to apply this technology that will be more useful and more helpful to more people than this specific detailed implementation. Even for the accessibility angle, most people would want to probably identify themselves as I'm speaking through this thing, right? Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. But it seems like that when things fall apart, you'd want there to be some kind of explanation. Like, if you see someone in person and they're using an assistive device to talk to you, you understand what the deal is, and you can accommodate that, right? But if you think you're just talking to a regular person and don't realize it's someone who has to use this to communicate with you, have some sort of allowance to that, I think that would help as well. So, I'm not even going to go so far as to say that this is a way that this technology should never be used. I'm willing to believe that this is a way this technology will be used, that when we're all 80, it will be so boring that no one will even talk about it anymore. But right here and now, I'm going to say, like, there are richer veins to be mined than this.
Can you imagine if it was Siri making these calls? It'd be like, hi, can I have an appointment between 10 and noon? And the other person's like, sure, I have one at 10. And Siri would be like, what do you want to convert 10 to?
Right, thinking. Ask again later.
I found this on the internet for you. I don't know. It's just, it's so tough because I can't stress enough. My initial reaction was so overwhelmingly positive, but then the moment I really started thinking about this, I was like, oh, this is kind of creepy. And I don't know. I maybe it's just me, but I feel like this is just Silicon Valley in a nutshell. Like, it's a bunch of people, probably dudes, probably entitled dudes just thinking, you know what, I really just don't want to be bothered making a reservation. Like, I'm too good for that. My time is too valuable. So what can I do? I can use the whole of human technology to fake something that sounds like a human to make that reservation for me. It's just...
So I could see where you'd come away with that on this, but I really think that there is actually a little kernel of the 70s era Silicon Valley idealism in this as well, perhaps a naive idealism, which is also part of it. But, and you know, like it was phrased as saving you time, and you can say, okay, it's got to save you time because you're so important, your time is so valuable because you're, you know, a rich tech nerd. But first of all, this technology is not exclusively available to rich people.
Sure, fair point.
Android is very democratizing technology. It's available on cheapo phones everywhere. A lot of it happens on the servers. You don't need to have an expensive device. And the way it was framed for the most part was, we're trying to help people with their lives. People have challenges in their lives. Everybody does. And we want to help them solve the problems they have in their life. Whether this is, you know, the biggest problem or the way people would want it to be solved, that was the stated motivation. Andy Ihnatko had a very optimistic take on this when he was tweeting it in real time. And he kept coming back to the message that Google was sending out throughout the presentation. As, not directly most of the time, but more or less indirectly contrasting themselves with Facebook. Basically, this is Andy interpreting what they're saying. It's like they, meaning Google, are trying to say, Facebook uses its power to abuse your privacy and exploit you and undermine institutions. We use our power, we meaning Google, to help you and improve your life. And that was the message. Use Google products because you have challenges in your lives, and Google products will help you overcome them. And again, I see the elite angle on there, but I think the populist sort of techno-optimism of, we take amazing technology, make it available to everybody for free or cheap, and it helps them with their lives, is a very sort of 70s Silicon Valley bicycle for the mind, personal computer on every desk, utopian philosophy. Again, perhaps naive, but I think, like I said, the heart is in the right place for this type of thing. There were other aspects of the presentation I'll probably talk about next week, like the digital well-being stuff. What was the other thing? Like the developing on Chromebooks, the whole Chromebook angle too, why they even do that. They have these cheapo computers. Like I mostly give Google the benefit of the doubt on this front, especially because, especially because it is less clearly tied to advertising. It's still tied to commerce, right? But it's less clearly tied to, this is a way for us to show you more ads, right? I mean, it's a way to gather more information about you so they can show you more ads. But anyway, I really believe that people working on this project think that the technology they're developing, the ability of a computer to understand and engage in a conversation in a little limited problem domain, can help humanity. I believe it can help humanity. It's just I'm not sure they've figured out quite how yet.
We are sponsored this week by Eero. Finally, Wi-Fi that works. We all know that one Wi-Fi router does not cover most places very well, because there's things like walls that no matter how many antennas you put on your router, there's going to be like small dead zones or rooms where it just doesn't reach, or the very edge of your yard where you have a smart bulb that you really want it to reach, but it just doesn't. What you need is a distributed system that broadcasts Wi-Fi from multiple physical points in a big mesh. Now, this is what schools and businesses and things have used for years, but they have to use, expensive and hard to administer enterprise stuff. Eero brings enterprise-grade hardware and features to consumers in an incredibly easy-to-use package. It's the easiest setup I've ever seen of any router, let alone a mesh system. It's incredibly easy. You launch the Eero app, it steps you through the whole thing. You start out with the Eero base station. You connect that the same way you connect any other router. You connect it to your internet connection. Then you plug in the Eero beacons that you have, the additional Eero beacons, and these are going to communicate with that base station and broadcast a nice mesh of Wi-Fi all around your house. The app will help you place the beacons in effective locations. You can measure their speed to make sure you're putting them in places where they're actually going to work and not like stepping on each other's toes or anything. And your experience is seamless. You walk around your house, you only see one network, and it just covers everything. It's wonderful. And again, I can't stress how easy it is to use. If you need any help, they do have great support as well, but I have a feeling you won't need it. So see for yourself how easy Eero is. I've never seen an easier system to set up for Wi-Fi, and it works really well. For free overnight shipping to the US and Canada, visit Eero.com, select overnight shipping, and then enter promo code ATP to make that shipping free. Once again, visit Eero.com, that's EERO.com, and at checkout, select overnight shipping, then enter promo code ATP to make it free to the US or Canada. Thank you so much to Eero for sponsoring our show. So this past week was the 20th anniversary of the original iMac, and lots of our friends in the Apple and writing world have given wonderful retrospectives, and lots of our podcasting friends have had lots of great talks about it. When the iMac came out in 1998, right? Yeah, I was still a PC person. I mostly ignored it. Like, I ignored almost everything Apple did back then because I was a PC person. But I do want to talk about one part of the iMac that did have a lot to do with the PC world because we shared it with them. I want to have a retrospective. Instead about the iMac, my retrospective is about USB and quite how much USB changed the world. Back then, like, it was like this new port, and it was hyped, and it was, everything that any new technology product got back then, standard level of hype. But I didn't fully realize, like, until a few years in, quite how much USB changed things. For one, it was a very inexpensive standard on all sides. It was inexpensive to host on the computer side. It was inexpensive to make USB devices. The logic on devices was very simplistic. It was just very cheap and simple to implement. This is why it beat FireWire at pretty much everything. This is why it beat Thunderbolt at pretty much everything and still does. USB is really cheap to implement. It also uses really cheap, simple cables and connectors. USB cables were standardized a long time ago, and so even as the user, when you're buying USB stuff, it's generally, not only does it cost less to buy up front, but also, like, you probably already have a cable for it. So for things that don't come with cables, you don't usually have to buy one. You usually have them, and you can keep USB cables around and use them with lots of different devices over time. So it was just very inexpensive on all sides, and that benefits pretty much everybody. Also, compared to other things at the time, when USB was introduced in the late 90s, the competitors on the PC side were basically serial ports, parallel ports, and SCSI. And SCSI was very rare on PCs. Like, you'd see it like on high-end workstations and servers. I know Macs used it a little bit more, but on PC, almost no PCs sold to consumers had SCSI cards. You could buy one, but they were expensive. And SCSI was, it was like a big ribbon cable interface. It was just a big parallel thing. It was a big pain in the butt. You had to have like SCSI terminators on the end of the SCSI chain. It was just a big pain. USB came and replaced all of that on the PC side with these small connectors with small, thin cables. The cables could be way longer. They could be up to 15 feet long. They were widely available pretty much everywhere. You can get them in lots of different lengths, different colors if you wanted. USB also introduced, I think for the first time on the PC side, bus-powered devices. Keyboards and mice had their own power through the PS2 port, but like other low-powered devices could get their power from the port, so they wouldn't need their own power supplies. This is, again, like another massive innovation in USB. And I mean, the number of innovations in USB, this is why I was thinking about this on my dog walk yesterday. Like, I was just enumerating in my head, like, all the things that USB changed for the first time. It's a huge list. So another big thing, just the sheer number of ports you could have on a computer. Until recently, USB ports were quite plentiful.
Couldn't help it, could you?
No, of course not. Most PCs sold back then had 2 serial ports and 1 parallel port, and 2 PS2 ports. Those are keyboard and mouse. But then almost all your peripherals had to be a serial port, which you only had 2 of, or the parallel port, which was usually your printer. And that's it. Otherwise, if you wanted to add on more than that, you usually had to buy an expansion card and stick it into one of your card slots. With USB, you could have more ports. And usually, the very first USB controllers came with 2 ports. And fairly soon in PC history, 4 became standard. And now there's even way more than that. And then also, huge game changer, hubs to add more ports. This was not possible with serial ports or parallel ports. And SCSI could do like a chain up to a certain amount, but it was a pain. And anyway, again, that was pretty much unheard of in consumer PCs. there was no such thing as a serial port hub or a parallel port hub that could multiply your parallel port into more parallel ports. Again, adding more ports meant adding expansion cards or just not having more ports. So that was another massive change. Then, on top of that, was the whole family of things that went into what was called at the time, breathlessly, plug and play. We made fun of Microsoft relentlessly for how bad plug and play was in Windows 95 and everything, but the fact is, there's a number of things about USB that changed everything about peripherals. So number one, you could connect and disconnect things without turning off the computer or having to reboot to get them to start working. This was huge. Like, if you wanted to install a new, device on one of your other ports, a lot of times you'd have to reboot or turn the computer physically off to do it either safely or in a way that worked. And obviously, also, if you're putting in cards, then you have to turn the computer all the way off, but leave it plugged in so it's grounded. Nobody ever did that. But anyway, that was a huge, huge pain right there, solved by actually hot plugging and unplugging things. Then, the way devices would communicate to the computer. Before USB, there really wasn't a way for devices to self-identify with the computer. The way the architecture worked would be like you'd install a sound card, and the sound card would have jumpers or dip switches on it that would pre-configure it, like it would hard configure it to be addressable by a certain I/O address and certain interrupts, certain IRQs and DMAs. Remember all this?
Oh, yeah.
When you would set up your sound card in your game that you were playing or whatever, you would have to tell the game, okay, I have a Sound Blaster 16. It's at I/O address 220, IRQ 5, DMA 1. And you had to make sure that was right according to the jumpers on the card, because if it wasn't, it just wouldn't work, right? There was no way for your card to tell the computer, I'm a Sound Blaster 16. I'm an audio device. Here's how you talk to me. Here's where I am. USB brought all of that in one standard. In addition to the nice cables and ports and hubs and everything, it brought device self-identification and auto-configuring of things like how to address it. That changed so many things. It made so many things better. And then combined with that, the other massive change with USB is that it introduced something called standard class compliant profiles. So this includes, we still hear these terms sometimes today, HID, USB audio, and USB mass storage profiles. So what this means is that you could, for the first time, I think, you could make like a standard USB sound card, and you could plug it into a computer. The computer would see it because of plug and play. It would know how to address it, and you could make it so that it required no drivers at all because it would just conform to the USB audio class compliant standard. Same thing. You could do the same thing with keyboards, mice, gamepads, joysticks, and then eventually mass storage, hard drives, SD cards, stuff like that. Like anything that, like, there was this whole class, network cards, video capture devices. All of these things could be driverless, that people could sell a device or whatever that you didn't have to install their terrible driver on. I can't tell you how much hardware that I had to either give up using or that never worked right at all because of random problems with their drivers in the PC world, like, or that they wouldn't update their driver for Windows 98 or whatever. Like, it was always a pain. And so the more you could do without drivers, the better. USB brought that world. Before USB, you had to do pretty much everything with custom drivers. With USB, you had standard class compliant profiles. That also meant that Macs and Linux PCs were usually able to use them too. And we still see those advantages today because when you have USB standard class compliant things, they also, for instance, work on iOS devices through the camera connection kit with no configuration, no drivers, nothing like that. All of this was back like in 1998. And a lot of what made the iMac possible and what made it great and what made it work was really USB. And, we complain a lot about the current standards and everything, but like USB still has all these things, and all of that started back then. So all of our friends are talking about how the iMac changed everything for Apple, and that's great. I think they're right, but I wasn't there for that part. I was in the PC world, and what we saw was that USB changed everything for us.
Well, I have a couple minor corrections for Marco in the PC world based on old Mac stuff. For the most part, I agree with what you said, but SCSI on the Mac, SCSI was everywhere in the early days of the Mac. It wasn't just like a niche feature that was on just the high-end Macs. It was everywhere.
Yeah, because Macs were expensive, lol.
Yeah, that's true. USB was part of a transition that started slightly before USB when the I/O chips and basically the price of compute and went down to the point where there was a realization that you could get less expensive and faster I/O by having by doing a very fast serial interface than a parallel one. Like SCSI was kind of the culmination of like, look, we need lots of data and we need it to go fast, so let's send it all at once in parallel down these gigantic cables and be really careful with electrical interference, induce terminators, and blah blah blah, right? Because that was the way. It's kind of like, we need more traffic on this road, let's add more lanes, right? And then the analogy falls down here with the cars thing, but like imagine you say, no, instead of having a bunch of lanes with lots of cars in them, let's just have one lane and send the cars at the speed of light and have something that can somehow deal with shoving the cars quickly into this little tiny drinking straw. So the price of compute went to the point where they realized serial interfaces were the future, not parallel interfaces. So we'd basically taken parallel interfaces as far as they could go. We realized how problematic they were. They're just finicky and big. I mean, I had SCSI cables that were like the thickness of like a hot dog. Like they huge non-bending cables that just very, very delicate, very finicky, very capable, and you could daisy chain them, which was interesting and everything, but serial interfaces were the future. And on that front, what Apple had for a long time before USB came along, which had a lot of the benefits that you cited, was Apple Desktop Bus. ADB was used to connect essentially the keyboard and mouse, and they had serial ports that had a similar looking connector for printers and stuff that work more like you would expect a PC serial port to do. But keyboard and mice, I don't think there were ever any ADB hubs, although I suppose there could have been. But the keyboard had an ADB port on one side that you would connect to the computer, and you could connect your mouse to a port on the other side of the keyboard, which should look familiar to anybody who has a USB keyboard with two USB ports on it, where you connect your wired mouse to the keyboard if you still have a wired mouse back in the day, right? You could plug and unplug ADB peripherals while the computer was on, and sparks did not fly, and the computer understood what you were doing, and whatever you plugged in, your computer would find it and configure it. Obviously, it's Apple Desktop Bus. It's proprietary. It's not an industry standard. So, of course, Apple could do this because they understood where all the peripherals came from, and they had their own standards for how they identified themselves. And ADB was a serial bus, mostly because, it was for low bandwidth things, and they didn't have to make it parallel, right? But those benefits, a lot of the benefits of the sort of the usability of USB and the convenience of it, Apple had been enjoying since the Mac SE and the Mac 2, or whenever ADB was introduced. I think that's when they both came out. When USB came along, it seemed like the next logical step, because it's a serial interface, because we can make serial interfaces fast and cheap. The cables are thin and not giant, thick, disgusting, SCSI things. The connectors were, despite all our complaints about, the externally symmetrical and internally asymmetrical, incredibly infuriating USB-A connectors, they definitely looked more modern than ADB, because ADB had like actual little pins inside it. It was from the old era of like, pins going into little holes in the back of your thing with like a metal sheath around it. And Apple did a pretty good job trying to make it so you understood the orientation, because the connector itself was round, but it only went in one way. You had to line the pins up. So they made the actual casing of them flat on one side. So you always knew like the flat side went up, right? And that's how you could figure out how to plug them in, but it was a little bit fidgety. But anyway, USB was an upgrade in that regard. And you mentioned FireWire before, and how, USB was more popular than FireWire. FireWire was another one of those, interfaces that came out of the idea that we can make really fast serial interfaces and give up on parallel. But it was the high-end one. It was like, how do we replace the highest of the high bandwidth stuff to replace SCSI with something that has way more bandwidth than USB, and that has guarantees about timing, and that can be chained together without, and that you can have high bandwidth without involving the then anemic CPU on the computer, which is how USB saved a lot of money, by having the computer CPU do a lot of the work and not having to put those smarts in the interface chips, which made the interface chips cheaper on both the host device and the actual peripheral, right? So it's not as if FireWire, quote unquote, lost to USB. It was clearly aimed at a different segment, at the less populous segment, the high end segment. It ended up being used for digital video. on camcorders and stuff like that. And, you know, it lasted a pretty long time, all things considered, because it was very expensive, but it was like, there was never going to be a FireWire mouse. Let's put it that way. It's nonsensical, right? But it's part of the same family of serial over parallel. And finally on the iMac front, yeah, like as you noted, the iMac, the most important thing about the iMac was not the fact that it, that it came with USB, let's say. But lots of other podcasts have talked about the more important aspects of it. That's what I thought we were going to talk about here, but now we're out of time, so I'm not going to dwell on it any longer. But the fact that it, not that it had USB, but as Jason Snell pointed out in his Macworld column, that it dropped all of the other ports that are on Macs. That was in terms of ports, the most shocking factor about it for an Apple user, because we had peripherals, we had ADB peripherals, and the benefits of USB over ADB, especially like when USB is first coming on the scene, it's like, what does this do that my ADB stuff doesn't do? I've already got an ADB trackpad, an ADB extended keyboard, an ADB mouse. Like, why do I need this new interface that I can't use any peripherals? What the hell happened to my SCSI port? I have stacks and stacks of SCSI hard drives here. I have a SCSI RAID. How do I connect these to my iMac? This thing is useless, right? And then I can't connect my printer to it. My printer's not USB. Who ever heard of a USB printer? I have a serial printer, and it gets plugged into the serial port. The same serial port that's been on my Mac since, 1986, right? I can't plug this in anywhere. How the hell do I print? And then, of course, the no floppy drive thing or whatever. So as a Mac user, as Jason pointed out, the iMac was met with some hostility by people who had a bunch of peripherals that they can't plug in. And unlike our current USB-C situation, there was not any real hope of dongles. There was ADB USB dongles, which I think Gruber is still using to use his Apple Extended 2 keyboard, right? But in general, it's not as if you bought a dongle for your style writer and just used it for years and years after that. It's like, no, everyone got USB printers. Like, what happened is USB slipped through the whole industry for the reasons Marco stated, and we just all got new stuff. And we said, oh, yeah, this is better, because instead of having a SCSI port and 2 serial ports and ADB ports, now I just have USB and then FireWire for the expensive high bandwidth stuff. And that was better, and that was the future. And like, I think this is like a positive version of this, of the USB-C story, where there's a lot of parallels and they seem very similar, but it's sure taking a lot longer than it did with USB for the USB-C revolution to come along and sweep us all away. And we're still kind of grumbling about dongles and kind of wishing we had some of our other ports back.
It also it says quite a lot about just how groundbreaking and forward-looking USB was, that now, 20 years later, you can take a USB device that was released 20 years ago for USB 1.1 and plug it in to an iMac Pro without a dongle. And it'll like, if it still works at all, it will work on that computer. That's like, nothing else in computing has lasted as long as USB has. It's incredible.
Well, VGA.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's not really used anymore, though.
Oh, you wish it wasn't used.
Well, yeah, I know projectors and stuff, but yeah, like most people in their house are not using VGA for anything. It's all HDMI and DVI and stuff. Even DVI is gone. I'm
amazed at the number of people take like their Retina Macs and plug them into a series of dongles that culminate in a VGA port so they can project. It happens all the time at work, and I'm just like, that is not you are not getting the maximum value for your money out of that computer.
We are sponsored this week by Casper and the new Wave mattress. For $100 off your Wave purchase, visit casper.com/ATP100 and use promo code ATP100. Terms and conditions apply. The Wave is the most innovative mattress from the sleep experts at Casper. It is the first mattress of its kind to relieve pressure at 36 different points so you can feel relaxed in ways you never thought possible. The Wave has advanced temperature-regulating technology to help you sleep cool and comfortable without overheating, and only the Wave has 5 layers of superior foam, including a cushioning top layer for maximum comfort. The Wave is Casper's biggest breakthrough in sleep technology for exceptional comfort and deep restorative sleep. and it supports you in all the right places. Whether you're a back, stomach, or side sleeper, the Casper Wave gives you the support and relief you need for a good night's sleep. Thanks to its patent-pending contouring system, it adjusts to your body and its natural curves. And it's designed to stay sturdy and keep its original form for years to come, no matter how much time you spend on it. All of this is an incredible value compared to similar high-end mattresses on the market. Experience Casper's most innovative mattress yourself. And this is the one I sleep on. I sleep on the Casper Wave. And man, is it good. I can't even tell you how good it is. I stopped caring about mattresses once I got this one because it's like, all right, I'm done. This is great. I never need to look again. So you too can see this for yourself. Experience it in your own home for 100 nights risk-free. And it gets delivered right to your home in a small box. And all Wave purchases come with in-home white glove delivery and setup for free. So see for yourself with that 100-night home trial. You can't go wrong. For $100 off your Wave purchase, visit casper.com/ATP100 and use promo code ATP100. That's casper.com/ATP100, promo code ATP100. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much to Casper and the wonderful new Wave for sponsoring our show and supporting me while I sleep.
All right, let's do some Ask ATP. And let's begin with Keimer, who asks, how do you have Finder configured? Do you view as icons or list or columns? Do you show tab path status bars, arranged by name, date, none, icons in the toolbar, tags, etc.? Does it differ per folder, one config system-wide, or do you adjust it as you go? I adjust as I go. I also don't find this question terribly interesting, but I try to keep the path bar or whatever it's called at the bottom on, the status bar at the bottom on, and other than that, everything gets adjusted periodically. I
have just learned what the path bar is as you said that. Wow, that could be useful.
Like you don't even read my reviews.
I use list view, status bar on so I can see disk space. I don't know. That's about, list view. That's about it. I normally I'm sorting by name, but in open save dialogues, when I'm viewing either the desktop or the downloads folder, I will sort those by date descending so that the new stuff always shows up on top. Because usually what I'm dealing with is the newest stuff.
All right, John. You only have let's cap you at 35 minutes if you don't mind.
No, I can't go into all the details of this, but how I use the Finder, I continue to try to use the Finder like I used to use the Finder in my first 16 years of Mac use. Of course. The current Mac Finder does not want to be used that way, and it fights me every step of the way, but I continue to wage that battle. Mostly because it's, I'm willing to forgive its forgetfulness and just, repeat actions over and over again just to get the experience I want. So the experience I'm looking for people to know how the Finder used to work, is the two main views I use are icon view and list view. Icon view, a couple of windows, I try to keep the icons arranged and the windows sized the way I want them, like the applications window and stuff like that. Sort of, windows without a lot of stuff in them. List view for almost everything else, for anything that has lots of stuff in it. And I'm very into the little, disclosure triangles of disclosing different hierarchies and changing the sort order and stuff like that. I never have the sidebar visible, so I don't have the path bar or anything like that. I always have the status bar visible because I always want to see the available disk space. So if you were to look at my Finder desktop, chances are good that you would probably see one icon view window, if any, and just a bunch of list view windows with various parts disclosed, all with the little status bar visible on the top.
I'm surprised you closed the sidebar. I actually like the sidebar.
No, I don't use it. I don't use the Finder as a browser is what I'm getting at. I do not use it as a browser. I try to use it as the old Finder, which is very difficult because it every once in a while, to give you an example, the applications window, which occasionally I find myself in, messing with applications or dragging something from a disk image or whatever, right? Every once in a while, the application window, which I have sized and arranged in a particular way, decides, nope, I'm going to be in a different size and a different position, and I'm going to have the sidebar now. Why does it decide that? I don't know. It just does. And then I turn off the sidebar on it, and I put it back where I thought it was supposed to be, and I readjust the view settings for it, and then I close it and hope it remembers again next time. But, at least like once a month or something, some window that it had previously positioned and configured in a particular way will decide now it wants to be this weird, metal browser thing. It's not metal anymore, I know. But no, I don't want to use it as a browser.
Andreas Ekegren writes, what are your thoughts on Volvo using Android and Google Maps and Google Assistant for their census system in the future? I think it's a first for car manufacturers. So as Chief Summarizer in Chief, what this is referring to is Volvo in the last few days has announced that for their quote-unquote iDrive, if you will, they're going to be working with Google to embed the voice-controlled Google Assistant, Google Play Store, Google Maps, and other Google services into its next-generation Sensus infotainment system, which will be based on Android. As an owner of a almost brand-new Volvo, I find this very interesting. I am tentatively optimistic about this. I would be very perturbed if this meant, as I presume it might, that I couldn't use CarPlay anymore. I obviously this is for the next generation, so it's not going to affect Aaron's car. But in the future, if it ends up that you can only use Android Auto and not CarPlay, that would really annoy me. But that being said, it would be pretty sweet to have Google Maps as the actual onboard, like first party, so to speak, mapping application, which I think would be super cool. So like, Marco, obviously this isn't relevant to you because you don't own a Volvo, but like, how would you feel about hypothetically Tesla saying, hey, we're going to use Google Maps from now on? Or do they already and I don't realize it?
They do use Google Maps for the map tiles and the map view. They don't use it for navigation.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So do you think this would do anything for you then? I guess it's sort of already there for you, huh?
It's not using like, Android and Google Assistant and everything else. So this would be a step forward or a step significantly in that direction from where Tesla is now. Ultimately, I buy a car for its other factors and I just deal with whatever entertainment system it has. So I would just deal with whatever they did.
I would like Google Assistant in my car because I think it does a really good job of figuring out what the heck I want and doing it. And my hilarious infotainment system on my Accord, like it lets you do voice calling, which occasionally I use. I know, why don't I just talk to my phone? I don't, because I don't have Hey Dingus enabled. And anyway, it's a whole bunch of reasons why I don't use the phone thing. But my car itself has a way to do voice calls, and it is terrible. It's like a difficult text adventure. Like, it's really hard. I know exactly what to do, and I still fail like 25% of the time. But I use it because my hands can be on the wheel, and then I don't have, anyway. So I would love for my car or any future car to have a Google Assistant and Google Maps and Google Navigation, because I think all those things are really good and surely better than what any car manufacturer would come up on their own, and also better than what car manufacturers would, buy from some third party like TomTom or whoever is selling infotainment systems now. So I applaud Volvo for making a deal with the best-in-class assistant and maps for their car, and I wish more people would do it.
Cool. Hudson Hayward asks, do you buy... it was asked as PlayStation 4, but I'm going to expand it. Do you buy video games, console video games, on disc/cartridge or as digital downloads? I generally like having physical cartridges or discs, but find the noise of the spinning disc to be excessive sometimes. I, generally speaking, prefer cartridges for the Switch because I can hand them to somebody else so they can play it for a minute. So I don't have to worry about like installing an SD card or anything in the Switch, which is not difficult for the record. I just don't, I don't have an extra micro SD, whatever it is, lying around. However, I will say that I deeply, deeply regret not downloading Mario Kart, because a game like Mario Kart it's one of the only games I'm ever going to play with friends on the Switch. And it would be super convenient if I could have, say, the Zelda cartridge in the Switch, but then just pop over and play Mario Kart for a minute with my friends and then go back to Zelda when I'm by myself. It's not a big enough deal that I would buy Mario Kart again in order to do it. But I do wish I had, for games like that where I know I'm going to be playing with friends kind of at a moment's notice, I would recommend downloading. Otherwise, I personally like the cartridges, but to each their own. John, how do you feel about this?
I searched to see if we'd been asked this question before because it sounds familiar, but I couldn't find it. But anyway, we are only 1 or 2 console generations away from these things not having a physical media port on them. I have never had a plastic disc inside my PS4 at all. I download all my games if I can possibly do it. The only card I have for my Switch is Zelda because I bought the special fancy edition, and you had to get a card with that. Like, they didn't have a digital one because it came with this big box with a bunch of accessories and doohickeys and stuff like that. Digital downloads, they are the way to go. I recommend it for everybody. Do not buy physical media if you can at all help it. It does mean that you might have to expand the storage on your system. It does mean you have to understand how this affects your ability to transfer games and have save state and what happens when you're on a move and so on and so forth. But we are in a transition period, and I feel like we're at the tail end of the transition period. Digital only is the future.
Yep, I'm with you. The very first thing I did when I got the Switch was buy a 200 gig micro SD card. Once I knew I could do that, I bought 0 cartridges. I have one game for Switch on a cartridge, and it's the Mario Rabbids game that I bought on Black Friday because it was on sale. I have yet to play it, but the cartridge has been in my Switch since Black Friday because all of our games are downloaded. So what's great is it kind of avoids Casey's Mario Kart problem. All of your games are always accessible to you. You can just always play whatever you want. You don't have to worry, I left that one at home, or I don't have that one with me right now. There is a real downside, as Casey said, that you can't just hand your copy of the game to someone else to play, or if you don't. If you want to have multiple Switches in your family, and you can't easily just transfer the games between them, so that's kind of annoying in certain cases. You also can't resell downloads, back to GameStop or whatever for $0. They can resell it for way more than that. You can't trade with friends. There are definite downsides to the way downloads are usually implemented, but as somebody who doesn't usually do all those things and who is instead very lazy, I love the fact that I can just pick up the Switch or turn on the TV with the Switch, and all the games that we have are just in a menu, and you can just pick whatever you want to play, and it just starts.
And a lot of those limitations you mentioned are actually just policy ones, and Nintendo historically has not been the best on the policy, but for example, on PlayStation 4, there's many games that I bought one copy of that I can play on both of my PS4s in the house. My son can play on his account on his PS4 because it's like a sub-account of mine or whatever. They have a way for a lot of games, not all, but a lot of games, for you to buy one copy of it and have 2 people playing it on different PlayStations on different accounts, which is a much better policy than the Nintendo policy, right? So it really is up to, and they could even do reselling and stuff like that if they wanted to. So it really is up to the individual company. And that's why I say become familiar with what the policies related to digital downloads on your console, and figure out if they're an issue. If you never resell them, you probably don't care about that. But if you do want to buy one copy of a game and have multiple people in the house playing it, find out if that's possible, and you might be pleasantly surprised. And by the way, I know I said it myself earlier, but I don't buy games on plastic discs. I prefer digital. Obviously, the digital and the plastic disc too. This is just like mechanical keyboards. Another one of those nonsensical things. It's like, oh, so you like digital games? Yeah, I get my games on vinyl. They're all analog.
The graphics are way better that way. Much warmer.
It's more about the ritual. Thanks to our sponsors this week, Mack Weldon, Eero, and Casper. And we'll see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
God, we just got another Switch cart in the house, and I realized that I had the Zelda Switch cart in my cart slot so long that I forgot where the cart slot was on my Switch.
Nice.
We got some dancing game for my daughter. She's going to use it at her birthday party. I'm trying to think, how do we end up getting this and not downloading it? But anyway, we have a second physical cart in the house now, which I'm already regretting, because then I have to take out my tiny little Zelda thing and put it somewhere where I don't lose it. I can't wait for them to do the, I don't know if you've been keeping up with this, but the Nintendo Online service that we're all currently enjoying a free trial of or whatever is going to become commercial. And as part of that, there's going to be cloud saves. Thank God. So finally, all my Zelda progress will be somewhat safer than it is now. I fear like that the kids are going to spill a drink on my Switch and I'm going to lose like 150 hours of Zelda.
Yeah, I'm worried about that for all of our saves too. Yeah, when is that launching? It's not soon, right?
I forget. September maybe? I don't know. Ugh. Google for Nintendo Switch Online. You'll see. I wasn't paying too much attention to it. I just saw the feature set, but it's before the end of the year, and I think maybe the fall.
And apparently we're going to be able to play Mario 3 multiplayer over the internet.
It's just more NES games. And by the way, you'll be able to play more NES games. Surprise. Yeah. We all kind of saw that coming out. I think they're giving you a bunch of good ones for free. I think they're giving you like Mario 3. I forget what they were. Anyway, just Google for the story to see details. But anyway, it's cheap. It's like $35 for a 7-person family per year. And cloud saves. That's all I need to hear. I would, have no idea how much I would play it for cloud saves. I'm so paranoid about this Switch.